All kings are subject to him. So this shows you that firstborn doesn't have to mean first one born. Firstborn can mean the heir, the one who's supreme, the one who holds preeminence, without necessarily meaning that he's the first one born. Is that clear from that example? So again, let me repeat. How do we know that when Paul says that Jesus is the firstborn of all creation, he does not mean the first one created? How do we know that? What in the context of verses 15 to 17 demonstrated that Paul could not mean that Jesus is the first one created? So when he called him firstborn, he didn't mean the first one created. Exactly. All things are created by Jesus, and he exists before all things. Therefore, he can't be part of creation if he created every created thing. He must be separate and distinct from all creation, right? So obviously in the context, firstborn cannot mean the first one born. Contextually, it cannot have that meaning. It's not because we don't want it to have that meaning. The context proves it cannot have that meaning, right? Let me introduce another problem with taking the term firstborn of all creation to mean that he's the first one created. Okay. Notice the phrase, firstborn of all creation. We saw that the context shows it cannot mean that he's the first one born or created. There's another reason why it cannot mean he's the first one created. Notice it doesn't say that Jesus is the firstborn of God. It says he's the firstborn of all creation. The NIV says overall creation, right? Now let me tell you why that's significant. Anytime when you read the phrase firstborn of something, that implies that the person being referred to as firstborn was produced by that entity or an individual. Let me spell it out so you follow with me. When you speak of the firstborn of Pharaoh, what do you mean? You mean the one that Pharaoh produced first, right? His first offspring, correct? Everyone with me? Firstborn of Jacob. That means the one that Jacob produced first. Jacob's first offspring. If firstborn of all creation literally means that Jesus is the first creation, then you have a problem. Because the way it's worded, firstborn of all creation means that creation produced Jesus. You follow with me? Firstborn of all creation, if taken literally, means creation produced Jesus first. Just like firstborn of Jacob would mean Jacob's firstborn, the one he produced first. You with me? Obviously, creation did not produce Jesus. So obviously, firstborn of all creation cannot literally mean that Jesus was born or created first, because if we take it literally, then it means that creation produced him, not the other way around. Because it does not say the firstborn of God. So clearly, firstborn of all creation cannot mean he's the first one born, because if it meant that literally, then what that means is creation produced Jesus as the first of its creation. Doesn't make sense. Therefore, firstborn of all creation in the context can only mean he's the heir and the one who's supreme over all creation, because he produced it for himself. That's what it means. Okay, take a few moments to meditate on what we just discussed. Let me just review. Colossians 1:15, in context, if you read 16 and 17 along with 18, demonstrates what Paul's point is. Paul did not mean that Jesus is the first one created. Paul meant, in context, that Jesus is firstborn by virtue of being supreme, being preeminent over all creation, and being heir, because Paul says that Jesus created everything for himself, and he sustains everything, which clearly proves that Jesus is eternal and all-powerful, because only someone who's eternal and all-powerful could exist before all creation and create all creation. So Paul clearly, in context, is affirming that Jesus is the eternal God, who's distinct from the Father, yet one with him in essence and nature. Let's go back to Colossians. Notice Sami quoted Colossians 1:15, didn't quote 16 to 17 or 18, right? Okay, coming back, let's also see what Sami did not quote. Colossians 1:27. Colossians 1:27. Remember, he says that Colossians denies that Jesus is God. That Paul in Colossians teaches that Jesus is a creature, not God. We refuted that lie by looking at verses 16 to 7 of Colossians 1. But notice this, Colossians 1:27. To them God chose to make known how great among the Gentiles are the riches of the glory of this mystery. And what is the glory of this mystery? Which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. The you there is plural. Christ in all of you. Christ in all of you. Can I ask everyone a question? What kind of attribute must Jesus have to be in all believers everywhere at the same time? Exactly, omnipresence. Now, can I ask another question? Is there any being other than God that's omnipresent? So if Paul says that Christ is in all believers everywhere at the same time, no matter where they're at, and that's an attribute that only God has, are you really trying to tell me that Paul didn't believe Jesus is God? Is that what you're really trying to convince me? You ready for the next? A passage that Sami did not quote. Let's go to Colossians 2:9. Colossians 2:9, what does it say, folks? And I'm going to give you the lexical source to see what the word theodotos means. For in him the whole fullness of deity dwells bodily. Some of the deity or the entire fullness of deity dwells bodily. In Christ. What did Paul say? Some of the divinity, some of the deity, some of the divine essence, or the entire divine essence. The full of what makes God God dwells in Christ bodily. Okay, now let me show you what this word means. I'm going to give you the lexical source. Theodotos. Okay, go here, folks. Go to this lexical source and see the definitions given, please. If you can go there. Do you see it says the state of being God? The state of being God. In other words, that which makes God God. In other words, whatever is necessary to being God. Whatever is necessary to being God. If it's necessary for God to be all-powerful, then Jesus has it. If it's necessary for God to be eternal in order to be God, then Jesus has it. Because Paul says, all that makes God what he is, Jesus has it in all its fullness. The whole fullness of that which makes God God, of what is necessary for God to have in order to be God, Jesus has. Well, now Christians, help me understand that. What are some of the things that God must have, necessarily have, in order to be what he is? List them for me. Some of the things that make God what he is, that he must necessarily have in order to be God. What are some of the things? Exactly, Bayside told you. In order for God to be God, he must be eternal, uncreated. He must be self-existent, exactly. He must be omniscient. He must be omnipotent. He must be omnipresent. Paul says, whatever is necessary to being God, Jesus has in all its fullness. Whatever God must have in order to be God, Jesus has it fully, completely, bodily. So he's affirming his human nature. So now, can I ask a question? If Jesus has all the essential attributes that go with being deity in all its fullness and perfection, are you trying to tell me that Paul in Colossians taught that Jesus is not God, but a creature? Is that what you really want me to believe in light of what we just read in Colossians 2:9? But according to Sami Zaatari, Colossians 1:15 teaches he's a creature. Okay, let's summarize what we learned from Colossians so far. I'm just summarizing what we learned from Colossians. Okay, here's the 4 points. I'm just summarizing so far. Okay. 5. That was supposed to be 5. Sorry. My numbering's off. Sorry about that. Jesus exists before all created things according to Paul in Colossians. According to Paul in Colossians, God created all things in, through, and for Jesus. Paul says that Jesus sustains all created things. Paul also said that Jesus is omnipresent in that he dwells in all believers. And finally, which is supposed to be 5, and excuse my typos, Jesus has all the fullness of that which makes God what he is bodily.